had.
It still feels unreal when you replay this game snap by snap, because what unfolded in Buffalo was the kind of night that defines a season and reshapes how the league looks at this Philadelphia Eagles team. Going into Orchard Park, in brutal conditions with cold, wind, and a driving rain that never let up, the Eagles walked into one of the toughest environments in football and walked out with an 11th win that was as dramatic as it was revealing. This was not just another result on the schedule. This was a statement built on resilience, defensive dominance, and a reminder that this roster is constructed to survive chaos. Come smash the like button if, like me, you're bleeding green and white, and drop a comment telling us where you watched this insane game. From the opening moments, the weather dictated everything. The Eagles came out throwing on their first drive, went 3 and out, and it was clear immediately that adjustments were going to be necessary. What followed, though, was one of the most impressive first halves this team has put together against elite competition. Jalen Hurts settled in quickly, operating efficiently once the offense found balance. The use of play action, snaps from under center, and selective deep shots gave the offense rhythm despite the elements. The connection downfield to A.J. Brown and the touchdown to Dallas Goedert were not just highlights, they were evidence of an offense capable of creating explosive moments even when conditions screamed for conservatism. By halftime, the Eagles had built a 13-0 lead against the Buffalo team widely viewed as one of the best in the AFC and riding a 4-game winning streak. That scoreline mattered, but how they got there mattered even more. This was complimentary football in its purest form. The defense suffocated Josh Allen early, special teams contributed, and the offense capitalized when opportunities presented themselves. Against a quarterback with MVP credentials and the physical tools to dismantle any scheme, the Eagles made him uncomfortable from the start. The defensive performance deserves to be framed in bold letters, because this unit continues to validate its Super Bowl credentials week after week. Since Week 7, this defense has been giving up under 15 points per game, the best mark in the NFL, and what they did in Buffalo only reinforced that trend. They pressured Josh Allen relentlessly, sacking him 5 times and generating double-digit pressures overall. They limited his damage as a runner, holding him to just 7 carries for 27 yards, and forced him to operate under constant duress. Through 3 quarters, it felt like a defensive clinic. Allen completed passes and piled up yards later, but context matters. Much of his production came late, when the Eagles were focused on preventing explosive plays and protecting the end zone. For most of the game, this defense made a quarterback who can do everything look human. That is not something many teams can say, especially on the road in weather that magnifies every mistake. And yet, this game was not without its tension, because the second half exposed a familiar and frustrating theme. With a 13-0 lead, the Eagles' offensive approach shifted dramatically. The play calling became conservative, almost hesitant, and the production vanished. After halftime, the offense managed fewer than 20 total yards. Against a Buffalo team that leads the league in second-half scoring at around 16 points per game, that approach invited trouble. You cannot expect any defense, no matter how elite, to hold down an offense like that for a full 60 minutes without support. The Bills eventually pushed back, scoring 12 points in the fourth quarter and bringing the game to the brink. Even then, the Eagles' defense continued to answer the call. The blocked extra point by Jalen Carter after Buffalo's first touchdown was massive, preserving a 7-point margin and changing the math late. When Buffalo marched down the field in the final moments and scored again on a Josh Allen sneak, the decision to go for 2 shifted the entire weight of the game onto one play. That play summed up the night. Buffalo had momentum. Overtime loomed. The Eagles' offense had been quiet for an entire half, and still, the defense stood tall. The 2-point conversion failed, and with it went Buffalo's chance to steal the game. It was a finish that left everyone catching their breath and reinforced a simple truth: this defense can carry this team anywhere. At 11-5, the Eagles are very much alive in the race for the NFC's second seed, needing help down the stretch but firmly positioned as a legitimate contender. This win also served as a high-level playoff tune-up against a Super Bowl caliber opponent. It showed exactly what this team does well and where the questions remain. The defense looks ready for January football against any quarterback, any scheme, any stage. The offense, while capable of explosive and efficient stretches, must find a way to stay aggressive and productive for 4 quarters, especially against teams that thrive on late comebacks. This game was thrilling, exhausting, and revealing all at once. It showcased championship traits and lingering concerns in the same breath, which is why it will be talked about long after the final score fades. From your perspective as a fan watching this unfold, what stood out to you the most in this win? And do you feel this defensive performance is enough to carry the Eagles deep into the postseason? What makes this win linger in your mind is not just the final stand on the 2-point conversion, but the bigger picture it paints about where this team is right now as the postseason approaches. This was the kind of game that strips everything down to identity. In terrible weather, against an elite quarterback, on the road, the Eagles leaned on what has quietly become the backbone of their season. Defense is no longer just a strength, it is the defining trait of this roster. When everything else became unstable in the second half, that unit never flinched. Vic Fangio's influence is impossible to ignore at this stage. Since mid-season, the transformation has been dramatic. The communication is sharper, the pass rush is more disciplined, and the coverage behind it has been far more connected. Against Josh Allen, that structure mattered. The Eagles did not rely on gimmicks or reckless blitzing. They trusted their front to win, collapsed the pocket repeatedly, and forced Allen to make throws under pressure instead of on his terms. 5 sacks in those conditions are not an accident. They are the result of a plan executed at a high level. There's also something symbolic about doing this in Buffalo. Orchard Park is loud, unforgiving, and hostile, especially in December. The rain and wind magnify crowd energy and test composure. Young teams crumble in spots like that. Teams without leadership panic when momentum shifts. That did not happen here. Even when the offense stalled completely, there was no visible unraveling on the sideline. The defense kept taking the field believing the next stop was theirs to make, and time after time, they backed it up. Still, it is impossible to talk honestly about this game without circling back to the offense and the choices made after halftime. The contrast between the first and second halves was stark. Early on, there was balance, motion, play action, and intent. Hurts was not asked to do everything, but he was put in positions to succeed. After the break, the play calling narrowed, the aggression disappeared, and the Bills were allowed to creep closer without resistance. Against lesser teams, that approach might survive. Against a quarterback known for erasing deficits, it is playing with fire. This is where the conversation naturally turns toward January. In the playoffs, margins shrink. Every possession carries more weight. Coaches who play not to lose often end up losing. The Eagles nearly learned that lesson the hard way here. The defense bailed them out, but relying on that every week is a dangerous bet. The encouraging part is that this is not a roster lacking capability. We have seen this offense operate efficiently and aggressively, including earlier stretches of this season and the first half of this very game. The question is not talent, it is approach. Context does matter, and the conditions were brutal. A driving rainstorm limits the playbook, affects footing, and makes timing routes risky. Perfect offense was never realistic in this environment, but even within those constraints, there was room to stay assertive, to at least threaten Buffalo enough to keep the pressure balanced. That adjustment, or lack of it, is what keeps this performance from being a complete masterpiece. Zooming out, the implications are massive. At 11-5, with the NFC East already secured and the second seed still within reach, the Eagles have positioned themselves exactly where you want to be heading into the postseason. They have beaten high-end competition. They have proven they can win ugly. They have a defense capable of neutralizing elite quarterbacks, which is the most valuable currency in playoff football. Few teams can say that with confidence. This game also felt like a measuring stick. A potential Super Bowl preview was floated before kickoff, and after watching this, it no longer feels like empty hype. Philadelphia went toe-to-toe with one of the league's most dangerous teams and walked out victorious despite leaving points and opportunities on the field. Clean up the second-half offensive approach, and this becomes a team no one wants to see in a win-or-go-home scenario. What stays with you most is the resilience. The Eagles never make it easy, but nights like this remind you why belief in this group runs so deep. They absorbed Buffalo's best punch late and still stood standing. That is not luck. That is preparation, talent, and a defense that understands exactly who it is. What follows this game is where the season really starts to feel heavy, because wins like this change expectations. They shift the internal standard from can this team compete to this team should expect to win. When you go into a place like Buffalo, against a quarterback like Josh Allen, in those conditions, and survive, the locker room understands exactly what that means. It confirms that the floor of this team is extremely high. Even when the offense sputters, even when coaching decisions invite pressure, even when momentum swings hard the other way, this Eagles team still has a trump card that travels anywhere. The defense has reached a point where opposing offenses know they are in for a long day. It is not just about sacks or points allowed, it is about how uncomfortable everything feels. Routes take longer to develop, pockets collapse faster than expected, and quarterbacks are forced into rushed decisions. Against Buffalo, the Eagles consistently won at the line of scrimmage, and that is the one area that does not care about weather, crowd noise, or hype. That translates directly to postseason football. Cold games, hostile environments, neutral sites. None of it matters if you can control the trenches. This is also where individual moments stack into a larger narrative. Jalen Carter's blocked extra point was not just a single play, it was a momentum breaker that completely altered the endgame. Plays like that are the difference between heartbreak and celebration in January. They are the reason coaches preach details all year long. Special teams often live in the background, but in games like this, they step into the spotlight and decide outcomes. At the same time, this win puts a mirror in front of the offensive staff. The blueprint for success was already on film in the first half. Balance, calculated aggression, and trust in the quarterback to make plays when needed. The second half showed the danger of abandoning that identity too early. Against teams like the Bears, the 49ers, the Rams, or any opponent waiting in the playoff bracket, leads evaporate fast if you stop applying pressure. The league is too explosive, and quarterbacks are too capable to coast for an entire half. What makes this situation intriguing rather than alarming is that the Eagles have already shown they can correct course. Earlier in the season, similar issues surfaced and adjustments followed. The hope, and the expectation, is that this game serves as a reminder rather than a warning sign. You escaped this time. In January, you may not get that luxury. The encouraging part is that these lessons are being learned in wins, not losses. As the playoff picture continues to take shape, the Eagles remain firmly in the conversation for a deep run. The NFC is loaded with talented teams, but very few can match Philadelphia's defensive ceiling. That reality alone makes them dangerous. Pair that with even a consistent, not spectacular, offensive approach, and this team becomes incredibly difficult to eliminate. Every contender has flaws. What matters is whether your strengths are strong enough to cover them when it counts. This game in Buffalo will be remembered as one of those moments that defines belief. It was stressful, imperfect, and exhausting, but it reinforced the idea that this roster is built for the hardest games on the schedule. That is what you want to see as a fan heading into the most unforgiving part of the season. There's also a psychological edge that comes from a win like this, and it cannot be overstated. Teams remember how they win just as much as how often they win. Escaping Buffalo in that fashion reinforces a belief that no situation is too big, no deficit in momentum too overwhelming, and no environment too hostile. When the postseason arrives and games tighten in the fourth quarter, those experiences surface. Players draw confidence from moments when everything seemed to tilt against them and they still found a way to close. This is where leadership quietly shows its value. When the offense stalled for an entire half, there was no visible panic. Drives ended quickly, the defense kept being sent back onto the field, and still the body language never collapsed. That speaks to veterans who understand the rhythm of long seasons and the emotional swings of difficult games. It also speaks to preparation. This team looked like it expected Buffalo to make a run. They absorbed it rather than being shocked by it. At the same time, the coaching staff now has clear, tangible film to work from. There is no hypothetical discussion needed. The contrast between halves is right there. The opportunities to be more assertive without being reckless are visible. In playoff football, adjustments between drives and between quarters are often the difference. This game provides a real-time case study of what happens when you let a dangerous opponent linger versus when you put them away. Another layer that matters is how this win lands around the league. Defensive performances like this change how opponents prepare. Offensive coordinators watching the tape see a unit that can rush with discipline, cover without constant help, and tackle in space even in poor conditions. That forces more conservative game plans, which plays directly into Philadelphia's hands. The Eagles do not need opponents to be perfect. They need them to be hesitant. This defense creates hesitation. Looking ahead, every remaining game and every potential playoff matchup now carries added weight. The Eagles are no longer just talented, they are proven in adversity. That changes the conversation. It changes how seeding discussions are framed and how matchups are evaluated. Even with offensive questions lingering, this team has shown it can survive its own imperfections, which is often what separates contenders from champions. Ultimately, this was a reminder that championships are rarely built on flawless performances. They are built on adaptability, toughness, and the ability to respond when things stop going according to plan. The Eagles checked those boxes in Buffalo. It was not pretty, it was not comfortable, but it was real. Another detail that deserves attention is how this game reframes the margin for error moving forward. When a team proves it can win despite leaving an entire half of offense on the field, it sends a powerful message, but it also sharpens the internal accountability. The Eagles know they escaped. They also know that the escape was earned by one side of the ball carrying a disproportionate load. That awareness can be productive. It creates urgency without panic, focus without overreaction. This is where the next stretch becomes less about standings and more about refinement. Seeding matters, of course, but rhythm matters more. The Eagles have already shown they can play dominant football in all three phases, and they have also shown what happens when that balance disappears. Buffalo exposed nothing new, but they did confirm what cannot be ignored. Against elite competition, you cannot shut down your own offense and expect the defense to be perfect forever. Even a unit playing at a historic level needs help closing games. What makes the situation encouraging is that the answers are already in-house. There is no personnel mystery here. The same offense that stalled after halftime is the one that built the 13-0 lead. The same quarterback who was efficient early is capable of executing late when given the structure and intent. This is about trust, sequencing, and situational aggression. Those are correctable elements, especially with meaningful football still ahead. There is also something telling about how narrow the final margin was and how little it reflects the overall control Philadelphia had for most of the game. For long stretches, Buffalo looked frustrated, rushed, and boxed in. That does not happen by accident, and it does not happen to Josh Allen very often. When a defense can dictate terms like that, it raises the ceiling of the entire team. Even if the offense has an average day, the Eagles remain dangerous. As this season edges closer to its defining moments, games like this become reference points. Players remember them, coaches reference them, fans feel them. Buffalo will be remembered as a warning and a confidence boost at the same time, a reminder of how good this team can be, and how thin the line is between control and chaos in the NFL. Now it turns into a question of application. Can the Eagles take what worked in the first half and stretch it across 4 quarters? Can they pair this elite defense with a consistently assertive offensive approach when the pressure is highest? Those answers will decide how far this run goes. There's one more layer to this game that keeps resurfacing the more you sit with it, and that is how clearly it defines the Eagles' personality under stress. Some teams rely on rhythm. Some rely on star power. This team, at least right now, relies on resistance. When things slow down, when momentum flips, when the opponent starts landing punches, the Eagles do not speed up emotionally. They dig in. That showed up on every critical defensive snap late in Buffalo. Those final possessions were not chaotic. They were controlled. Gap discipline held.